She stood on the balcony of her penthouse, overlooking the glittering city she had conquered through decades of relentless ambition. Victoria Sterling had everything money could buy. Properties across 3 continents, a business empire worth $500 million, designer clothes that filled entire rooms, and a social circle of the world's elite. Yet at 52, surrounded by luxury, she felt an emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. Her marriages had been strategic alliances, her relationships calculated moves in the chess game of high society. She had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen, truly loved for who she was beneath the designer labels and corporate titles. Then came an unexpected encounter that would change everything. A young man, barely 28, with paint-stained fingers and dreams too big for his modest apartment. He didn't know who she was when they first met. He didn't recognize her face from magazine covers or business journals. He simply saw a woman sitting alone in a coffee shop reading poetry, and he smiled at her like she was the most interesting person in the room. What Victoria didn't expect was how this connection would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, age, and authenticity. Society had taught her that successful women her age should maintain distance, should be dignified, should never show vulnerability. But this young artist saw through her armor with an innocence she had long forgotten existed. Their story isn't just about an unconventional romance. It's about rediscovery, about stripping away the layers of protection we build around our hearts, and about finding the courage to be vulnerable when you've spent decades being invincible. This is the story of how Victoria Sterling, the woman who had everything, finally found the one thing money couldn't buy: genuine affection that asked nothing of her except to be herself. Victoria Sterling's mornings had become a perfectly choreographed routine. Her alarm sounded at 5:30, followed by a workout with her personal trainer, a protein shake prepared by her chef, and a review of international markets before most people had their first cup of coffee. By 7, she was in her office on the 45th floor, making decisions that affected thousands of employees across her tech and real estate empire. She had built Sterling Enterprises from nothing, starting with a small software company in her late 20s and expanding into a conglomerate that dominated multiple industries. The business magazines called her a visionary. Her competitors called her ruthless. Both descriptions were accurate. Success at her level required sacrifices, and Victoria had made them all without hesitation. Her personal life reflected the same efficiency as her business operations. 2 marriages had ended in amicable divorces, both 2 men from similar backgrounds who understood that their union was as much about portfolio optimization as it was about partnership. She had no children by choice. Believing her companies were legacy enough, her social calendar was filled with charity galas, board meetings, and networking events where every conversation served a purpose. At 52, Victoria looked a decade younger, thanks to the best dermatologists, nutritionists, and stylists money could employ. She maintained her appearance, not out of vanity, but as another asset to manage. In her world, presentation mattered. Perception was reality. Every detail of her life was curated for maximum impact and minimum vulnerability. But lately, something had shifted. During quiet moments, usually late at night, when her assistant had gone home and her emails were finally answered, Victoria found herself staring at her reflection and wondering who the woman behind the polished exterior really was. She had spent so long being Victoria Sterling, CEO and mogul, that she couldn't remember the last time she had simply been Victoria. A woman with hopes, fears, and desires that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or market share. It was this restlessness, this unnamed yearning for something she couldn't quantify or purchase, that led her to make an uncharacteristic decision on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Instead of returning directly to her office after a lunch meeting, she asked her driver to drop her at a small independent bookstore she had noticed during her commute. This spontaneous detour, so unlike her scheduled existence, would prove to be the moment everything changed. The bookstore was tucked between a vintage clothing shop and a Vietnamese restaurant, the kind of place Victoria would normally never notice. It was called Between the Lines, and its weathered wooden sign and cramped window display suggested it had been there long before the neighborhood's recent gentrification. She entered hesitantly, immediately feeling out of place in her Armani suit and Louboutin heels. The store smelled of old paper, coffee, and something else she couldn't identify, perhaps possibility. Narrow aisles wound between floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books that showed signs of being actually read rather than displayed. Behind the counter sat a young man absorbed in a sketchbook, his pencil moving rapidly across the page. He wore a faded band t-shirt and had dark hair that fell across his forehead. When the door chimed, he looked up, and Victoria was struck by the warmth in his brown eyes. "Welcome," he said simply, offering a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Looking for anything specific or just exploring?" His voice carried no hint of recognition, no change in tone that indicated he knew who she was. It was refreshingly, startlingly honest. "I'm not sure," Victoria admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "I haven't been in a bookstore like this in years. Maybe something ... unexpected." She almost laughed at her own request. When was the last time she had wanted anything unexpected? The young man's smile widened. "Unexpected is my specialty. I'm Daniel, by the way. I work here part-time while I finish my art degree." He set down his sketchbook and moved from behind the counter, his movements easy and unself-conscious. "What kind of books do you normally read? Or better yet, what kind of person do you want to be when you finish reading?" The question caught Victoria off guard. No one had asked her what kind of person she wanted to be in decades. People asked about her investment strategies, her business philosophy, her predictions for various markets, but her personal evolution, that was uncharted territory. Someone who remembers what it's like to feel something real, she found herself saying, shocking herself with the vulnerability. Daniel's expression didn't change to pity or confusion. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully, as if her answer made perfect sense. He led her through the store, pulling books from shelves with the confidence of someone who knew every volume intimately. He didn't ask about her budget or try to steer her toward bestsellers. Instead, he shared stories about each book, why it mattered, how it had affected him or other readers. His enthusiasm was infectious, genuine in a way Victoria hadn't encountered in her carefully curated world. They talked for over an hour, moving from literature to art to philosophy. Daniel treated her opinions with respect, but wasn't afraid to disagree, engaging with her ideas rather than deferring to her. For the first time in years, Victoria felt like she was having a real conversation, not a strategic negotiation. When she finally left with a small stack of books, she realized she was smiling in a way that felt completely unfamiliar, like a muscle she'd forgotten existed had suddenly remembered its purpose. Victoria returned to the bookstore 3 days later, telling herself it was simply to finish browsing. She had cleared an hour from her afternoon schedule, listing it vaguely as personal development time on her calendar. Her assistant had looked surprised, but said nothing. Victoria Sterling didn't take personal time. Daniel was there again, this time helping an elderly customer find a cookbook. He looked up when she entered, and his face brightened with recognition. "You came back. Did you start any of the books?" His genuine interest, devoid of flattery or ulterior motive, felt like cool water after years in a desert. They fell into conversation easily, discussing the poetry collection she had begun reading. Daniel shared his own interpretations, which often differed from hers, but he listened to her perspectives with real attention. He asked questions that made her think, challenged assumptions she'd held for decades. It was intellectually stimulating in a way her boardroom debates never were. As they talked, Victoria learned about Daniel's life. He was 28, working 2 jobs to pay for his final year of art school. He lived in a studio apartment in a neighborhood Victoria's security team would have deemed unsafe. He painted cityscapes and portraits, trying to capture what he called the truth beneath the surface. Money was tight, success uncertain, yet he spoke about his future with an optimism that seemed almost naive. What surprised Victoria most was that she found herself sharing details of her own life she rarely disclosed. Not the rehearsed biography from press releases, but real moments. Her loneliness at the top, her uncertainty about what all her success actually meant, her suspicion that she had optimized her life into a beautiful cage. Daniel listened without judgment, without trying to fix her problems or extract advantage from her confidences. When she admitted she couldn't remember the last time she had done something purely for joy, he suggested she join him at his art studio that weekend. No business talk, no networking, he promised. Just painting. Badly, probably, but that's part of the fun. Victoria's first instinct was to decline. Her weekends were carefully planned. Yoga with her trainer, brunch with influential contacts, reviewing quarterly reports. Attending whatever charity event required her presence. Spontaneous activities didn't fit her schedule. Yet, she heard herself accepting his invitation. That night, lying in her king-sized bed in her empty penthouse, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. Anticipation, not the strategic excitement before a business deal, but genuine, nervous anticipation about spending time with someone who made her feel like a person rather than a portfolio. She found herself wondering what Daniel saw when he looked at her. Not Victoria Sterling, the billionaire. Not the face from magazine covers or the name on building directories. Just Victoria, a woman who was starting to remember she existed beneath all the armor she had built. For the first time in years, she fell asleep thinking not about market trends or merger opportunities, but about the warmth in a young man's smile and the possibility that there might be more to life than everything she had spent decades achieving. Saturday morning found Victoria standing outside a converted warehouse in a part of the city she had only seen from car windows. She wore jeans, something she hadn't donned in years, and a simple sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail rather than her usual sleek style. She felt exposed without her armor of designer labels and executive presence. Daniel met her at the entrance, his face lighting up when he saw her. "You came, and you dressed for actual painting. I wasn't sure if you'd show up in Chanel and worry about the paint splatters." His teasing was gentle, affectionate, and Victoria found herself laughing in a way that felt genuine rather than polite. His studio was a chaos of creativity. Canvases in various stages of completion leaned against walls, paint tubes cluttered every surface, and the smell of turpentine mixed with coffee filled the air. It was the opposite of her carefully organized world. And something about its authenticity made Victoria's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Daniel set her up at an easel with a blank canvas and basic supplies. "There are no rules," he explained. "This isn't about being good. It's about expression, about putting something from inside you onto the canvas. Don't think about technique or perfection. Just feel and respond." The concept was foreign to Victoria, who had built her empire on strategy, planning, and precision. At first, she was paralyzed by the blank canvas. Her mind immediately began trying to plan what to paint to ensure whatever she created would be acceptable, impressive. But Daniel stood behind her, his voice soft and encouraging. "Stop thinking. What color makes you feel something right now?" Victoria reached for a deep blue without analyzing why. As she began to paint, something unexpected happened. Years of controlled emotions, of calculated responses, of never showing weakness, all of it began to flow onto the canvas in colors and shapes that made no logical sense but felt profoundly true. She wasn't painting anything recognizable, just expressing feelings she had suppressed for decades. Daniel painted alongside her, occasionally offering gentle guidance, but mostly just creating his own work. They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the sounds of brushes on canvas and the distant noise of the city outside. Victoria lost track of time, something that never happened. Her phone buzzed repeatedly in her bag, but for once, she ignored it. When she finally stepped back from her canvas, she was shocked by what she saw. A chaotic swirl of blues and grays, with sudden bursts of unexpected gold. It was raw, unrefined, and somehow more honest than anything she had produced in her professional life. "It's terrible," she said, but she was smiling. Daniel came to stand beside her, studying her work with serious attention. "It's real," he said quietly. "That's what matters. You put something true on that canvas. That's braver than most people ever manage." His words touched something deep inside her, validating a vulnerability she had spent decades learning to hide. As they cleaned brushes and talked about art, life, and everything in between, Victoria realized she hadn't thought about her companies, her wealth, or her public image for hours. She had simply been present, engaged, alive in a way she couldn't remember feeling since before ambition became her defining characteristic. Daniel offered her coffee from a dented thermos, and drinking it felt like the finest champagne she'd ever tasted. Over the following weeks, Victoria and Daniel developed an unlikely friendship. She found herself carving out time in her ruthlessly efficient schedule to meet him at coffee shops, to visit galleries, to walk through parks discussing everything from philosophy to their favorite childhood memories. Her assistant noticed the change but wisely said nothing. Daniel introduced her to his world. Dive bars where local artists gathered, late-night diners with questionable health ratings but excellent pie, small theaters showcasing experimental plays. These places existed in a city Victoria thought she knew but had never truly experienced. She was surprised to discover she preferred them to the exclusive venues she usually frequented. What struck Victoria most was Daniel's complete lack of interest in her wealth. He never asked about her business, never sought advice on investments, never hinted that he needed financial assistance, despite his obvious struggles. When she tried to pick up expensive dinner tabs, he insisted they split the bill. "I want to spend time with you, not your money," he said simply. This attitude was so foreign to Victoria's experience that it took time to trust it. Everyone in her life wanted something from her. Investors wanted her money. Employees wanted her approval. Peers wanted her connections. Acquaintances wanted her influence. Daniel just wanted her company, her thoughts, her perspective. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding who she was beneath the public persona. One evening, after they had been walking along the river, discussing their different views on success, Daniel stopped and looked at her seriously. "Can I ask you something personal?" Victoria tensed, expecting questions about her wealth or her past. Instead, he asked, "Are you happy? Like, really happy, not just successful?" The question hit Victoria like a physical blow. No one had asked her that in decades. People asked if she was satisfied with quarterly results, if she was pleased with acquisitions, if she was content with her portfolio's performance. But happy, that seemed like a luxury she had traded away long ago in pursuit of something she had thought was more important. "I don't know," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "I've been so focused on achieving, on building, on winning, that I'm not sure I remember what happiness feels like. I know what satisfaction feels like when I close a deal. I know what vindication feels like when my instincts prove correct. But joy, pure, simple joy, I think I lost that somewhere along the way." Daniel's response wasn't pity or judgment. He simply took her hand, the gesture so natural and undemanding that Victoria didn't pull away. "Maybe it's not lost," he suggested. "Maybe you just need to remember where you left it. What made you happy before you became Victoria Sterling, business mogul?" The question opened a floodgate of memories Victoria had buried. Painting as a young woman, reading poetry until dawn, dancing without caring who watched, believing in love stories and happy endings. She had dismissed these things as naive luxuries she couldn't afford once she entered the business world. Success had required sacrifice, and she had sacrificed the parts of herself that felt too soft, too vulnerable, too human. As they stood by the river, the city lights reflecting on the water, Victoria realized something terrifying and exhilarating. She wanted to rediscover those lost parts of herself. And somehow, this young man with his paint-stained hands and impossible dreams made her believe she could bet. That night marked a turning point. not in what she did, but in how she saw herself and what she wanted from the years ahead. The shift from friendship to something deeper was gradual and terrifying. Victoria found herself thinking about Daniel during board meetings, smiling at texts from him while reviewing contracts, rearranging her schedule to create more time with him. These were behaviors she associated with infatuated teenagers, not serious businesswomen in their 50s. She tried to rationalize her feelings. He was refreshing company, a break from her usual circles. He provided perspective she found valuable. They had intellectual compatibility. But late at night, alone in her penthouse, she couldn't deny the truth. She was developing romantic feelings for a man 24 years her junior. The realization brought waves of fear and doubt. Victoria hadn't experienced since her earliest days of building her business. What did she have to offer him beyond financial security he didn't want? She was past the age of starting families. Her body showed signs of aging, despite expensive interventions, and their life experiences were vastly different. The age gap seemed insurmountable. Moreover, she worried about how a relationship would look. Society might label her as predatory, as a wealthy older woman exploiting a young man's financial vulnerability. Her business reputation could suffer. Board members who barely tolerated a woman in power might use a scandalous relationship as ammunition against her. The risks were substantial and very real. Victoria decided to distance herself, declining several invitations to meet Daniel. She threw herself back into work with renewed intensity, staying late at the office, accepting every social obligation, filling every hour so she wouldn't have time to miss him. It was the same strategy she had used throughout her life. When emotions became complicated, focus on achievement. But Daniel wasn't deterred. He showed up at her office building one evening, waiting in the lobby with coffee and a concerned expression. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked directly. "You've been avoiding me, and I'd rather you just tell me if you don't want to be friends anymore instead of ghosting me." His honesty, as always, disarmed her carefully constructed defenses. Victoria suggested they walk, and they ended up on a bench in a nearby park as evening fell around them. "It's complicated," she began, but Daniel cut her off gently. "You're worried about the age difference," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "You think I'm too young for you, or you're too old for me, or society won't approve, or whatever other objections you've been listing in that strategic mind of yours." His perception surprised her. She had thought she was being subtle. "I'm 52, Victoria said quietly. "You're 28? That's not a small gap, Daniel. People will make assumptions. They'll think I'm using you or you're using me." He interrupted her by taking her hand, the gesture simple but charged with meaning. "Do you feel something for me?" he asked directly. "Because I feel something for you. Not for Victoria Sterling, the CEO, but for you. The woman who gets excited talking about poetry, who laughs at terrible puns, who painted her feelings that day in my studio. The real you. And I don't care what anyone else thinks about it." His words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable, demanding an equally honest response. Victoria realized she stood at a crossroads: retreat back into her safe, controlled world, or risk everything for something real. Victoria sat on that park bench, Daniel's hand warm in hers, and made a decision that went against every calculated instinct she had honed over decades. "Yes," she whispered. "I feel something for you. Something I haven't felt in so long, I almost don't recognize it, and it terrifies me." Daniel's face broke into a smile that seemed to illuminate the growing darkness around them. "Good," he said. "Terror means it matters. If it was easy and safe, it wouldn't be worth the risk." He spoke with the confidence of someone who had little to lose, but Victoria understood his point. She had taken enormous risks in business, bet everything on ventures that seemed impossible. Why couldn't she take the same approach to her personal life? Their first real date was nothing like Victoria had experienced in her previous relationships. Daniel planned it, refusing to let her take control or suggest expensive venues. They went to a small Italian restaurant in his neighborhood where the owner knew Daniel by name and the menu was handwritten. The wine was table wine, the pasta was handmade, and the atmosphere was more authentic than any Michelin-starred restaurant Victoria had frequented. Over dinner, they talked not about their differences, but about their connection. Daniel explained what attracted him to her, her intelligence, her hidden vulnerability, the way she listened, like she actually cared about his opinions. The glimpses of the passionate woman beneath the executive armor. "You're beautiful," he said simply, "but it's your mind and heart that fascinate me." Victoria shared her own feelings, admitting how his presence had awakened parts of herself she thought were dead. "You see me," she said, "not my accomplishments or my bank account or my public image. You see the person I forgot I was? That's a gift I didn't know I needed." After dinner, they walked through the city holding hands, and Victoria didn't care who might see them or what photos might end up in tabloids. For the first time in years, she was living in the moment rather than calculating 3 steps ahead. It was liberating and terrifying in equal measure. Daniel walked her to her building, but she invited him up to her penthouse. He had never seen where she lived, and his reaction to the opulent space was interesting. He looked around with appreciation but not envy, interest but not coveting. "It's beautiful," he said, "but I prefer your face when you're painting to anything in this place." They stood on her balcony overlooking the city, and Victoria felt the vast distance between their worlds and the small, precious connection that bridged it. "This won't be easy," she warned. "People will judge us. There will be complications I can't even predict yet." Daniel turned to face her, his expression serious but unafraid. "Nothing worth having is easy. You taught me that, actually, when you told me about building your business. You took risks when everyone said you'd fail. Maybe it's time to apply that same courage to your personal life." He was right, and Victoria knew it. She had spent her life being brave in business and cowardly in love, protecting her heart while risking everything else. As Daniel leaned in to kiss her, gentle and unhurried, Victoria decided to finally risk the one thing she had always protected, her heart. The kiss was soft, tentative, filled with promise and possibility. When they pulled apart, Victoria was smiling, genuinely and completely, in a way she hadn't in decades. The following months tested Victoria and Daniel's relationship in ways both expected and surprising. The tabloids eventually caught photos of them together, and the headlines were predictably cruel. "Sterling Silver Daddy, Billionaire's boy toy, and worse." Victoria's board members requested private meetings to express concern about her reputation. Old friends from her social circle stopped calling. But there were unexpected joys too. Daniel brought spontaneity into Victoria's rigidly scheduled life. He'd show up at her office with picnic supplies and convince her to play hooky for an afternoon in the park. He introduced her to his friends, young artists and dreamers, who treated her like a person rather than a celebrity. They challenged her perspectives, made her laugh, reminded her that life existed beyond quarterly earnings reports. Victoria, in turn, brought stability and encouragement to Daniel's chaotic, creative life. Not through money, he still refused significant financial help, but through belief. She attended every gallery showing of his work, providing honest feedback rather than empty praise. She used her connections not to buy his way into galleries, but to ensure his work was actually seen by people who mattered. She believed in his talent when he doubted himself. They learned to navigate their differences. Victoria's need for planning and structure clashed with Daniel's spontaneous nature. His casual approach to finances stressed her ordered mind. Her workaholic tendencies frustrated his belief in work-life balance. But they approached these conflicts with honesty and compromise, building something neither had experienced before, a true partnership. Victoria introduced Daniel to her world gradually. He attended charity galas in rented tuxedos, charming donors with his genuine enthusiasm rather than practiced networking skills. He asked naive questions that sometimes cut to the heart of issues the business elite had overcomplicated. Some of Victoria's colleagues were scandalized, but others found him refreshing. The most significant moment came when Daniel met Victoria's ex-husband, Richard, at a business dinner. Richard was everything Daniel wasn't. Polished, wealthy, from the right background, he looked Daniel up and down with barely concealed disdain. "So you're the young man everyone's talking about," Richard said, his tone making clear this wasn't a compliment. Daniel smiled easily. "Unintimidated, I am. And you're the man who was lucky enough to have Victoria in your life, and foolish enough to let her go." His response was delivered without hostility, just simple truth. Richard had no response, and Victoria felt a surge of affection for this young man who defended her not with aggression, but with quiet confidence. On Victoria's 53rd birthday, Daniel surprised her with a painting he had been working on for months. It was a portrait of her, but not as the world saw her. He had painted her as she looked that first day in his studio, vulnerable, authentic, covered in paint, smiling with real joy. "This is how I see you," he said. "This is who you really are." Victoria actually cried, something she hadn't done in years, because someone had finally seen her completely and loved what they saw. Not her success or her wealth or her power, but the woman who loved poetry and missed painting and sometimes felt lost despite knowing exactly where she was going. They stood together in her penthouse, the portrait between them. And Victoria realized something profound. She had spent her life building an empire, but Daniel had helped her rebuild herself. True wealth wasn't in her bank accounts or properties or business holdings. It was in this connection, this genuine affection that asked nothing of her except to be present, authentic, and brave enough to love, without calculation or defense. For the first time in her adult life, Victoria Sterling felt truly rich. Victoria and Daniel's story isn't a fairy tale with a perfect ending, because real love isn't about perfection. It's about two people choosing each other despite the complications. Despite the judgment, despite the very real challenges that come with bridging different worlds. They continue to navigate their age difference, their different life stages, and the external pressures that come with a relationship society doesn't understand. But they navigate together with honesty and courage and a commitment to seeing each other fully. What Victoria learned through this unexpected love is that success without authenticity is just an elaborate performance. She had spent decades building an empire while neglecting the architecture of her own heart. Daniel didn't complete her. That's not how real relationships work, but he reminded her that she was more than her achievements, that vulnerability isn't weakness, and that it's never too late to rediscover the parts of yourself you thought were lost. She learned that age is less important than authenticity, that genuine connection transcends social conventions, and that the bravest thing a successful person can do is admit they don't have everything figured out. For any woman who has ever felt that her age, her success, or her past defines the love she deserves, Victoria's story offers a different perspective. Real affection doesn't follow timelines or social scripts. It appears when you're brave enough to be vulnerable, when you value authenticity over approval, when you're willing to risk the comfortable life you've built for the authentic life you crave. Victoria found love not by changing who she was, but by remembering who she had always been beneath the armor. And in doing so, she discovered that the greatest luxury isn't wealth or power or success, it's being truly known and loved by someone who sees you completely. That's the fortune worth building, the investment that pays the richest dividends, the success that actually satisfies the soul.